Afternoon, whether you're or joining us online via Zoom. Williamsburg Baptist Church is a congregation that has been in life and ministry for nearly 200 years now, since 1828 or there around, and we're still going strong. And this is our second event of our 2021-2022 lecture series, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have Reverend Dr. Paul Wallace joining us this afternoon. So often it seems in religious circles that science and faith are like oil and water, doesn't it? They just don't mix. You can look back through history and it's easy to point to the ways in which the two have been in conflict and tension. And more often than we would care to admit, the conflict between science and faith leads to tragic results. I was thinking on my drive here this afternoon about Galileo, who was placed under house arrest for the latter half of his life, after being forced by the church to recant his position that the earth revolves around the sun. Think about that for a minute. And more recently, we've seen the flashpoint between science and faith in our own society as we've struggled to navigate the coronavirus pandemic, have we not? Some people of faith fight tooth and nail, it seems, to try to prove that everything in the Bible is literally true, and where science and faith conflict, they would just say, well, then you have to reject the science and trust Scripture. And you can visit the Creationist Museum in Kentucky if you want to learn about how young the Earth is, or see how big Noah's Ark was. And Paul, I'm excited to hear how old you think the Earth is in your presentation in a minute. At the opposite end of the spectrum, there are folks who simply seem to throw the baby out with the bathwater, reasoning that if there's tension between science and faith, or Scripture and science, well, then there can't be anything of worth in this book here. And so we'll just reject the whole enterprise altogether. I don't necessarily know where the conflict started. I'm going to guess the Enlightenment or sometime thereabouts. But I'm so grateful for the work of folks like Paul Wallace, who recognize both the goodness and truth of what science offers us, while also recognizing the unique lens that faith brings to our understanding of the cosmos and our place in it. We believe that it's possible to bring science and faith into conversation with one another in creative ways so that our faith augments our scientific understanding and our science enriches our faith and our understanding of ourselves as well. And so, Dr. Wallace, we're delighted to welcome you to share with us today. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Wallace is a teacher and pastor, scientist, writer, and speaker. He teaches physics and astronomy at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia, and serves as pastor of adult education at First Baptist Church of Decatur. He's the author, most recently, of the book Love and Quasars, An Astrophysicist Reconciles Faith and Science. Today, we welcome him to share a lecture entitled An Ash Heap with a View, Science, Religion, and the Strangest Book in the Bible. And so, Reverend Dr. Paul Wallace, welcome.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me? It's great to see you all. Thank you for coming out on what is kind of a drizzly, dull, cold. Cold. Has it been this cold all week? No, I didn't think so. It wasn't this cold in Atlanta this morning. I can tell you that. But it's great to be here. Great to be in your church, sharing the early evening with you. I'd like to take you back now to our den. My den in 1978. I was 10. We had a Zenith TV, old tube TV. We had shag carpet. We had wood panel walls. We had a World Book Encyclopedia. And right above that, we had a bunch of books, Time Life books that you got like once a month or once every, I don't know, once a quarter, I don't know. Every now and again, they'd show up in the mail. And there was one about time, there was one about physics, there was one about chemistry, one about natural history, and so forth. You know, earth science, a whole series. They're all scientific, published by Time Life, nice hardback deals. And, pardon me. And I remember one day in particular, my dad sat down with me with one of these books. It was the natural history one. I love natural history. When I go into a natural history museum, I feel like I'm going to church. He gave me this book, and I opened it up, And it had a bunch of stuff in it, fossils, pictures of dinosaurs or of artists' conceptions of what dinosaurs looked like. And it also had in it something that looked like this. I've got a lot of slides, so I'll be walking back and forth a little bit, but something that looked like this full color timeline of the past. And if you look at this closely, what you'll discover is that the dinosaurs lived a long time ago, but it wasn't really that long ago. There was a lot of stuff that came long way before the dinosaurs. And so I looked at this and I got this sort of sense of deep time, right? I'm a 10-year-old. I'm like, what is this? My imagination sort of got sparked by it. And it was quite a moment for me seeing this timeline. And I'm not going to step you through this. Okay, it'd be a little tedious. And you'd probably turn the lights out and leave me in here if I started going through this particular one. What I want to do is use something that was popularized by Carl Sagan back in about the same time, actually, 1977. It's called the cosmic calendar. And it helps give you a sense of deep time, the past, not last week, not last year, but way, way deeper than that. So the idea of the cosmic calendar is this. There's the calendar. On January 1st, at the stroke of the new year is the Big Bang. It's when it all got started, as far as we can tell. And right now, November 6th, 2021, us sitting here at the Williamsburg Baptist Church is the end of the year. We're ringing out the year. And what we're going to do is to ask ourselves, if we compress all of cosmic history into 1 year, where do certain events fall on that calendar? Okay, for example, the creation of atoms. Atoms, after midnight, we had to wait around about 15 minutes for atoms to appear. Hydrogen, a little bit of helium, mostly hydrogen. Okay. 15 minutes. But then we have to wait about 4 days till January 4th for the first stars to appear. And a lot of those stars are still around. The little ones, the big ones aren't. But the little stars, the stars that were formed early and that were small, are still with us. January 4th, 4 days into the year, is when the first stars lit up. Then we had to wait a while. Wait through the spring, winter time, into the spring, into May 11th, for our home galaxy to show up. The Milky Way. Now, this is not a picture of the actual Milky Way. We don't have a picture of the actual Milky Way because you can't take a galaxy selfie. You can't get far enough away from the galaxy to take a picture back of it. Okay, you can't do that. In fact, in 1,000 years, our fastest space probe wouldn't cross 1 pixel of this picture. Okay, so this is an enormously large thing. It takes light about 100,000 years to cross it. And light, let me tell you, moves fast. May 11th, our Milky Way. And actually it does, we do believe it looks something like that. We have it's a nice place to call home. We could have done worse as far as galaxies goes. We really think that our home galaxy, the Milky Way, does look something like this. It's a nice 2-armed spiral. So we have that going for us. September 1st, 2/3 of the way through the year, the solar system is formed, along with the sun, all sort of got happening at the same time. And I should say too, that it might have been, August 29th, it might have been September 4th, but it was sometime around September 1st. And it didn't all happen at once. The formation of the solar system took hundreds of millions of years. Build slowly. Usually things don't happen real quick in space. Some things do, but most things don't. Most things take a very long time. And the building up of our solar system was one of those. Then, 3 weeks later, the first life showed up. Now this is actually salmonella. So don't eat it. And it was not around, 3.5 billion years ago, but something like it was. It's bacteria. That's the simplest life forms that we can imagine showed up about 3.5 billion years ago. All right. Which is a long time. September 21st. We're approaching 3/4 of the way through the year. And life has finally showed up. A few days later, it's a few days from now, in fact, November 9th. Actually, it should be November 8th. Do you know how I remember that it should be November 8th? I'm not sure how it became 9. Mysterious things happen in my life. That should be an 8. I know it's an 8 because this is complex, what we call complex life, complex cells, cells with nuclei. This is a protozoan, pardon me. I know that complex life shows up on November 8th because that's my wife's birthday. So that's sort of a fixed point in my mind. So my wife's birthday is in 2 days. Okay, on Monday. I don't know. So November 8th, November 9th, who's counting? The life becomes more complicated. The cells start having little parts inside of them that themselves have little functions. They get more complex. Okay. December 5th, we have what we call multicellular life. This is algae. This is what we call red algae. You can see why they call it red. Red algae, the cells start putting themselves together, or the cells are put together. The cells combine. And so we have even more complex life. December 5th, and we're only up to algae. December 14th, middle of December. Now this little creature here, anybody know what that's called? I heard it. Trilobite. What's your name? Good job. I don't mean to embarrass you, I'm sorry. A trilobite, if you go into any natural history museum in the world, you'll see at least a handful of these. I've got one on my desk. They're not hard to, actually not that hard to find, but the trilobites sort of skated along the ocean, the floors of oceans that don't even exist anymore. The oceans themselves don't exist anymore. But the trilobite was an enormously successful design. These just lasted essentially unchanged for almost 300 million years. So December 14th, trilobites were dominating the ocean floors. And they come in all sizes too. December 18th, fish. Now, fish appear in the fossil record on December 18th. Now, I don't know if this fish is still there. It used to hang in the the Smithsonian Natural History Museum on the mall. Used to hang there. I suspect it's still there. They redid it a number of years ago, and I've not been back. But this is great because you can see the big fish. The big fish is probably 12 feet long. But what you can see, maybe from the cheap seats back there, is that there's another fish about 3 feet long inside of it. This fish had just had its final meal, and then that was the end. But it's a lovely fossil, truly lovely fossil. But fish showed up in the fossil record on December 18th. Life started in the oceans. And then, just like it does for us, at the end of every December, things get busy, right? Things start happening faster and faster and faster, right? Same happened in natural history. December 20th, flowering plants showed up. December 21st, insects had been around for a while, but on December 21st, apparently they winged insects, the first showed up on December 21st. Amphibians on the 22nd, and reptiles on the 23rd. So a lot happening. The ball is rolling faster and faster and faster. Life is becoming more and more complex. And then, bad news. Sorry to break it to you. what you see here, I'm not going to get into the details of it. What you see here is basically extinction rate over time. So this is today, right here, 0. And then this is millions, as you can see, millions of years ago. So sometime about 260 million years ago, the Earth experienced, life on Earth experienced the largest mass extinction in history. Over a very short time, approximately 96% of all living things, all species, disappeared. And we don't know why. Some other of these, we know why. Okay, we know what happened. That last spike on the right, the one that the taller one on the right, not the little bitty one on the far right, but that one, that's the one that knocked out the dinosaurs. But the largest mass extinction in all of Earth's history occurred on Christmas Eve. Ironic, but true. Okay, and so that now when this happens, evolution kind of hits the reset button. After a big extinction event like this, evolution kind of goes bonkers because there's all this room to try new things. And so as soon as there's this nice combination. When there's an extinction right after that mass death, there's all kinds of new life that just begins to flourish. Evolution tries all kinds of things. Most of them don't work out, and some of them do. So that was 260 million years ago or so. Now, shortly after that, mammals appear in the fossil record. This is us, that's not us, but this is our team. Okay, mammals are our team. Showed up around December 26th. But so did, after that, so did the, the dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs ruled the Earth on December 29th. Mammals stayed pretty small because, see those teeth on the dinosaur there? Mammals couldn't grow large enough. They would just, those spaces were already taken up by the dinosaurs, so mammals stayed very small. Okay. December 29th, now we've got to the dinosaurs. Earlier on, I told you that when I was looking at a natural history book, what really struck me was that there were so many things that happened before the dinosaurs. I thought the dinosaurs were like the first thing ever, but no. Dinosaurs, December 29th. The year, in so many ways, is basically over. You're just sitting around, in your socks watching TV, waiting for the new year to start so you can go back to work. Your socks and your, pajamas. The year's basically over. And the dinosaurs have just now come to dominate. In the morning of December 30th, Swiss Army knives showed up. No, that's a joke. No. That's only here for scale, we've got to put something there for scale. Otherwise, you'd have no idea how large this picture is you're looking at. So the thing I want to point out to you, watch closely, is not the Swiss Army knife, but this line here. That line is really weird. It marks a point in history about 66 million years ago. And two things about that line. If you look at that closely, if you look at and see what's in that white line, two things. One of them is quartz, but not just any kind of quartz. Normally, if you look at quartz super up close and you looked at its atoms, they would all be in little rows, like a bunch of soldiers in line. That's the crystal, right? So there's this nice orderly structure to it. The quartz in that white line is what we call shocked quartz. All the little rows are all bent out of shape. Still quartz, but it's all bent out of shape. It's been shocked, and we never ourselves knew how to make shocked quartz until back in the 50s we started these underground nuclear tests. And these nuclear weapons that were detonated below ground shock the quartz. And so what you get in the quartz around these explosion sites is that you get the same thing. All the little lines are still quartz, but they're all bent out of shape. The quartz has been shocked. Another thing you find in that white line is an element called iridium. It's right there in the periodic table, okay? But it's not that common on Earth. I mean, we can find it. You go outside and get yourself a spoonful of dirt, there'll be a few atoms of iridium in there, but there's a whole lot more atoms of other things. Iridium is pretty rare, but it is not rare in asteroids. Aha, exactly. Iridium is not rare in asteroids. Now, the reasons for that will take us down a little path I don't want to go down. But what I want you to see is that there's more evidence than those two things. That's the kind of evidence that leads us to think that that white line is due to essentially an asteroid striking the Earth. That would explain the shock quartz. That would explain the iridium. It would also explain the fact that this white line is found globally. Everywhere you go, if you dig down 66 million years ago, you'll find that same line. And this is exactly the point in time in which the dinosaurs disappeared. There's more evidence that leads us to believe that what knocked out the dinosaurs was in fact an asteroid, a rock from outer space. And if you want to know, I probably can't explain to you how jarring that was as a 10-year-old to realize that the dinosaurs were knocked out by a rock from outer space. Because you gotta wonder, don't you? When's the next rock coming? I mean, you know, the rocks are still out there. We're watching them all the time. If you want to if you're having trouble filling the hours, go to the NASA Near Earth Asteroid data set and just scroll through it. It's accessible to everybody. You can find out which asteroids pass close to the Earth, what the probability is of them hitting the Earth. You can find out how close they come to the Earth. The typical unit is moon distances. That's what they use to tell you. So it's a nice way to spend an evening. But the point is that the dinosaurs were knocked out sometime the morning of December 30th. And they never came back. Okay. The dinosaurs that did remain became what? Anybody know? Birds. That's right. Birds, he said, crows, those pigeons you see on the city streets, cardinals in your backyard, whatever. Those are descendants of the dinosaurs. Which is interesting enough for an entire whole talk, but that's not the program tonight. 8 minutes to go in a year, 8, count them, is when human beings, Homo sapiens, arrived in our modern form. Okay, by modern form has something to do with the shape of the jaw, the shape of the forehead, things like that. But what we recognize as human beings, as Homo sapiens, arrived with 8 minutes to go in the year. I mean, the party is going. You know, people have already had too much to drink, and let's ring the bell and let's go home, right? And we're just showing up. We're just showing up to the party, just with 8 minutes left to go. With 13 seconds left to go, we learn how to write. All of recorded history, all of it, is in the last 13 seconds of our cosmic calendar year. All of it. Last 13 seconds. Then it goes real fast. Jesus walks on the earth, or rather the water, at 5 seconds to go. We're counting down in 5, 4, 3, 2, right. With 1/2 of a second to go, General Washington crosses the Delaware. And with 1/10 of a second to go, Neil Armstrong walks on the moon. So Happy New Year. We made it. So this was quite a jolt for me. Because I did read the Cosmic Calendar in Carl Sagan's book, and about the same time, my dad had a bunch of Carl Sagan books around too. Cosmos was to come out like the following year. He had the Dragons of Eden laying about, and that's where I first encountered the Cosmic Calendar. So all this kind of, blew my little blonde hair back, and I took notice. Made me feel weird too. made me feel weird. It felt personal to me, but I'll get onto that in a minute. I'm going to say a few more words before we change gears. Does anybody in this fair audience know what that is? Anybody seen it before? I think, picture of weird thing. This comes from the notebooks of Charles Darwin. This is when he first had the idea that perhaps species were not created individually, like, you know, a child modeling animals out of clay, right? But that maybe life on Earth, species had common ancestors. Different species maybe had common ancestors. And this is the first, what we call phylogenetic tree that Charles Darwin ever wrote down. And what it's supposed to do is to represent the dividing of species over time, the diversification of life from a smaller number of simple organisms to a larger number of species over time. Now, the species is actually a really difficult thing to, when you get down to it. It's one of these things that's easy when you sit on your back porch and you're like, oh, there's a chickadee and there's a cardinal. Those are clearly different species. But when you start looking at the world closely, these lines between things can get blurred. More on that in just a second. But this is Darwin's idea, okay? The origin of species. Now this is what we have. This is actually a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the same tree today. We've got the animals in red, fungi in blue, protists, which is a single-celled organism, in yellow, plants in green, and then up at the top, we also have bacteria down here in blue, and then we have other at the top, the purple ones. Those are essentially unmatched socks. That's the unmatched sock drawer. Yeah, right, things that just don't, you know, fit in their little mental boxes. And this, and each one of these, I don't know if you can see, it's really not easy to see, but around the edge, you have this little gray, it's like a little gray carpet or something around the edge. Those are each individual names of species. There's about 3,000 species on this circle. But that is about 1/30 of 1% of all the species that we actually have named, okay, on this picture. So this is a tiny slice of the total number of species that we have. And we're actually on here. See this little, this is a speck back there. There's animals right there. There's a little, it's like maybe it's a little dark line right there. But if you go up and look at that closely, you look in that box closely, here we are. Right there, Homo sapiens, right there. Somehow between a rat and a mouse, I'm not sure why. Because there's only a handful of mammals. There's only 3 mammals shown on this. And even so, mammals are overrepresented on this picture. But we're in there. See, we're in there. We belong in the big circle of life. We belong in there. That's us. And so somehow all these different species, millions of them, are related. If you trace these back, all these little forks back, you'll come down to what we call the last universal common ancestor. We are related to all life. And I don't mean that in a sort of a general hand-wavy kind of way. I mean that literally. I mean that, you know, the hickory trees and the chickadees and the protozoa are our relatives. Dinosaur, you know, other hominids and so forth were our ancestors. We are related, literally, if you just run the clock back far enough, we're related to all the life around us. It's a crazy thought. It was shocking for me when I was 10, but I loved it. I loved thinking about it. Now there's the moon. You recognize the moon. You've seen that before. Now, what I want to show you here to scale, the only reason the moon is there is to show you this little box here. You've heard of the Hubble Space Telescope before. right? Still up there. The people who operate the telescope have what's called discretionary time. So the project scientists, the main scientists who help run the thing, they get like a certain number of hours of telescope time. It's called discretionary time. And so what they decided to do years ago was to take the telescope and to open it up to a part of the sky, a little bitty piece of the sky, much, much, much smaller than the full moon, where there was nothing. That's not easy to do anymore, to find a corner of the sky that big where there's nothing cataloged. Astronomers have thousands of catalogs of different kinds of objects, containing millions and millions and millions of objects. But they found a part of the sky, in the northern sky, that was empty. A little bitty patch of sky. So that if you held up a dime at about, not arm's length, about twice arm's length, this little patch of sky is basically FDR's eye. Little bitty thing. And so what they did is they opened up the eye of Hubble to that empty spot and kept the eye of Hubble open for about 100 hours. And what Hubble saw was not nothing, found that. That was inside that square. And again, if you're having trouble filling the hours, pull up a very large version of what's called the Hubble Extreme Deep Field, put it on full size, and scope your way through it. There are about 3 stars in this picture. I can see 2 now. There's one there, and there's one there, and there's one there. So that's 3. Okay. Everything else is a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars. Those 3 stars that I pointed out are in the extreme foreground, kind of like bugs on the windshield. Okay, and so there's a depth thing happening here. And so the point is that no matter what we look in any direction, and it's been done in other spots of the sky too, and gotten essentially the same picture, no matter what direction we look, in the darkest part of the sky, we will find that. There are about 10,000 galaxies in this picture. This little picture in this brightly lit room doesn't really show you the detail, but you can scroll through it and spend hours looking at it. About 10,000 galaxies. And we would see the same essential picture no matter what direction we looked. Every direction the same. So, it's a big world out there. It's an old world out there. And it's an evolving world out there. And in here. This is, all of this was quite a shock to me when I was young. Like I said, it kind of felt personal, kind of hurt my feelings a little bit, because I didn't get a lot of the details. You know, scientific details kind of got past me. But what I did get was this. This is what I got out of this. I got out this idea that I couldn't let go of, that I was nothing. I mean, I really felt this. And I was like, it really upset me. It felt personal. I felt like I was nothing. Now, turns out that, well, let me put it this way. Let me back up a little bit. There are other questions as well, and let me put these questions to you. 3 questions came to me. And these are the questions I want you to remember. Number 1, aren't I significant? Number 2, what's God? If this is all true, and I saw no reason to disbelieve it, people I trusted told me, my teachers told me, my dad told me, and you know what? My dad didn't just hand me science books, he also took me to church. Like every time the doors were open, which in 1978 was pretty often. Well, I went a lot, and I loved it. So, you know, I figured something's going on here. I'm supposed to be significant. God is supposed to be a certain kind of God, and you know, let me put it to you this way: My dad was a pretty nice guy. And basically for me, God was like dad, but bigger and invisible. That's essentially how I understood God. And so if this is the way the universe is, with all this death, all this random rocks from space killing dinosaurs, I mean, God should be at least as nice as my dad, right? So what's God like anyway? I had this idea of God as basically being like my dad, but maybe that wasn't right. Maybe that I had to work that out. What's God like anyway? Aren't I significant? And finally, the third question kind of belongs to the top in some senses. What am I supposed to believe? I go home and I get these science books. I mean, Dad hands me science books. Dad takes me to church and they give me another book, right? And it's got a timeline too, but it doesn't match this one. It's got these 6 days of creation right in front. So just a few pictures to sort of emphasize to you these questions. Aren't I significant? Or maybe I should put it as, aren't we significant? Aren't human beings significant? What are we supposed to believe? We have a Bible on one hand, we've got Carl Sagan's Cosmos on the other. What do we do? Right? I mean, this is a nice creation story, right? God reaches down and touches Adam, and there's a lot of angels around, and there's no death here. There's no, mass extinctions here. It's a nice, clean, simple creation. And also, God's kind of like dad. Oh, look at that, right? God's a person. He's got arms and legs. My dad had a beard in the 70s. A lot of dads, I think, had beards in the 70s. I love this picture. Anonymous Armenian teenager. This is her picture called God. There's God. God is a big version of us. What's God like anyway? This is one of the weirder pictures of Adam and Eve, but I love it because I basically love it for all the weird animals right at the front. But you can see here, we got Adam and Eve, but who's that in the middle? Oh, that's God, right? God is again understood, and even in Genesis 3 there, right? God's walking through the garden in the cool of the evening. So we have a very anthropomorphic, very human-like God. And here's Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. Now it's really, I actually sat down a couple of weeks ago. I was teaching a lesson and I read through that. That is really something, that Sermon on the Mount. But you know what he said? What Jesus said on the Mount? He said that people are more important than birds. He said, aren't you, look at the sparrows. They don't store away in barns. Actually, they do, but Jesus didn't catch that point. He said, birds don't store away in barns, yet they are, taken care of. And aren't you worth much more than a sparrow? Jesus telling us in Matthew that we are worth more than birds. The entire Bible I'm trying to get across to you is totally human-centric. The cosmos, as you can see, is not. Line up all the species, and we're in there somewhere. Somewhere. You got to look for it. The Bible is very human-centric. We are cosmically significant in Scripture. In science, we're not. The Bible begins with a garden, but it ends in a city, a human city, the New Jerusalem. A human city where people live. The Bible is human-centric. That's not a critique of the Bible, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to criticize the Bible in this case. I will criticize the Bible at times. That's not what I'm doing now. But I'm simply pointing out the great difference in atmospheres between what I learned of science and the universe and what I learned in church. Oil and water, as Art said. These were not mixing. And of course, finally, like I said, who do we believe? All right, we got 6 days of creation. We have 13.8 billion years of evolution. I actually looked at my timeline for Adam and Eve, and they weren't there. And I, also noticed that there was nothing about mass extinctions in the Bible. So I was really getting these very different flavors. And so that was the problem. Aren't I significant? Aren't we as a species significant? Who do we believe? What they tell us in church, or what they tell us in science books? And finally, what is God like anyway? Keep those three in mind as we go forward. Now, what I didn't know, get a little drink of water here. What I didn't know when I was 10 is that the Bible contained a whole lot of crazy stuff that I didn't know about. For example, the book of Job. What did I learn about Job? He was a good man, bad things happened. He didn't curse God, and then God gave him all his stuff back. That's basically, I was Sunday schooled out of the actual Job story. Didn't get it. I missed, what I just told you is like the first 2 chapters and the last 2 chapters of a 40-chapter book. There's a whole lot of stuff in the middle that they don't teach you in 4th grade Sunday school. And it turns out that Job has some answers. Maybe not answers. I'm not super big on answers. When my students ask me if they can ask me a question, I say, sure, you can ask me a question and I'll ask you a question. In other words, I don't give them answers, I try to make them think. I'm not super big on nice little answers you can put in the box, especially when it comes to theology and life in general. But there are some very suggestive ideas in the book of Job for this problem between the science books and the Bible. The difference of atmospheres. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Job. You know probably the basic story of Job. The curtain rises on the book of Job. We got a good guy. I don't mean good with an asterisk. I mean, he's good. There's no qualifications here. He's rich. He's got lots of kids. He is an important guy. He's very much not an everyman. He is sort of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of where he lives. He's the big cheese. And not only that, but he kind of deserves it because he's really thoughtful. He's really wise. He's really a sage, and he's really compassionate with people who are on the margins. The widows, the orphans, the destitute, the beggars, the lepers. He is good. He is generous. He prays for his children. He's got a nice house. He's got it going on. Okay, then the action cuts to heaven, or wherever God lives. Here's God on the throne, and he is having court. Now, in those days, heaven was pictured as a court. It wasn't just God, it was God and all these sons of God. And one of these sons of God was known as the accuser, who later on evolved into what we call Satan. But he was full standing, good standing in the heavenly court, had access to God, which is a pretty big deal. And he comes up to God, and God says, "What you been doing, accuser?" And now the accuser is basically like a divine prosecuting attorney. Okay, he walks to and fro upon the earth seeking out iniquity. That's what he does. Okay, and not a very pleasant guy, but we need prosecutors too. So he belongs in the heavenly court. And so he says, "So what you been doing, accuser?" "Oh, I've been walking to and fro." And God, not the accuser, God says, "Have you considered my servant Job, Mr. Looker outer for iniquity? I bet you can't find any with him. He is," notice God brings it up. The accuser doesn't. God brings it up. Check out Job. And the accuser's like, yeah, Job. Right. The accuser says, the thing about Job is that he's sort of been living on the sunny side of reward and punishment here. You know, he's been good, he's given him a lot of stuff. If you took away his stuff, he wouldn't be so good anymore. In other words, he's good just because he's just basically a trained dog, right? He gets his reward, jumps to the hoops, good dog. Okay. So what the accuser is really interested in here is if righteousness has conditions or not. Okay, because Job is righteous, but the accuser says, oh, you take away the good stuff, and he will not be so righteous anymore. And God says, sure, have at it. Now, we're not going to worry about why God would say this. Okay, I don't understand this story at all. But God says, have at it. Just don't hurt him. So immediately, all of Job's 10 children are killed. All of his wealth is gone. You know, his cattle, that's basically how wealth was measured then. Livestock gone, right? Children dead. His wealth is gone. And he doesn't curse God. You know, he's like, okay, he's sort of cool and philosophical about it. Right? Okay, well, so, you know, should we receive the good from God and not the bad? This is going to connect with science, I promise you. I hadn't forgotten the first part of my talk. Okay, it's going to come back around. And so he doesn't curse God. And then all the stuff in heaven happens again. God says to the accuser, where have you been? The accuser says, walking to and fro upon the earth. And again, God says, hey, check out Job. He didn't curse me. He's still on the good side. He hadn't cursed me. And the accuser's like, okay, well, that's because he's healthy. It's because he still has his body. Okay, and God says, okay, you can ruin his health. Okay, but you can't kill him, which sounds compassionate, but then you realize the only reason that the accuser is not allowed to kill Job is so they can figure out what happens with the experiment. Does Job curse God or not? It's a very weird story. So Job gets sick, you know, boils all over his skin. I don't know, it's leprosy, I don't know what it is, but it's really unpleasant. And he ends up outside the city walls on the Ash Heap, which is where you go, you know, essentially when you're mourning and you're homeless. He was essentially, he had stopped helping the poor, he had become the poor at this point. No wealth, no social status, his health was gone. Have you heard the phrase, the patience of Job? Whoever coined that phrase did not read beyond the first 2 chapters of the book of Job. Because let me tell you, starting with chapter 3, gets pretty hot. Job lets God have it. Oh, by the way, some of his friends have come around to help him out through the mourning period, the grieving. And for 7 days, they do the right thing. They don't say anything. They just sit with him, which is what any pastoral counselor will tell you to do. Somebody who's just lost everything. You sit with him. But then after 7 days, Job opens his mouth and lets God have it. He doesn't blaspheme God exactly, but he gets right up to that cliff. I mean, just right up to that cliff. He is hot and he is angry. He is really mad at what has happened. That he's lost everything. He's really angry about it. And his friends, when they hear him, Job yells at God, and his friends are like, no. You can't be mad at God. This is on you, Job. You've done something wrong, and you're paying for it. So get a clue. Figure out what you did wrong, repent, and all shall be returned to you. Job's like, no, I have not sinned. And Job's right. Job hasn't done anything to deserve any of this. Okay. Job says, no, I have not sinned. His friends are like, oh, yeah, you have. Oh, no, I haven't. And it goes on and it goes on, and people get madder and madder. Job has all kinds of horrible names for his friends because they won't just believe him that he has lost all of this and it's not his fault. And what Job wants, here you go. What Job really wants is justice. He's a judge. He knows enough about justice to know that he's not getting any. He's getting none. He wants justice. And you know what? He thinks, get it, that God's a big version of him. He starts yelling at God, saying, God, come down here and be at least as fair and compassionate with me as I am with my people. Because Job thinks God is a big version of him, and that God's main job here is to cast a fair judgment, or at least give Job a decent explanation of why this has happened. God doesn't show up for 36 chapters, 38 chapters. This goes on and on and on. And God doesn't show up. I turn to my left, he's not there. I turn to my right, he's not there. I look ahead. And God is not present. Just wants God to show up and sit on the throne and cast a fair judgment. Finally, after 37, 38, doesn't matter, a lot of chapters of this, God shows up. And God does not say a single thing about justice. God does not say a single thing, a word of explanation to Job's concerns. Now, what are Job's concerns? Number one, one of Job's concerns is, aren't I significant? What about me? I'm the big shot here. I'm the one who's supposed to be running this town. Aren't I significant? You have forgotten me. The second thing he's thinking about is, what is God like anyway? If God's not a big judge, what's God like? He thinks God is like him. What's God like anyway? And he's also asking himself, who do I believe? My own experience? Do I believe my own experience that tells me that I am sinless, yet I am suffering? Or do I believe this tradition that my friends are feeding me, the tradition that made me, the tradition that says that that when you do good things, you get good things? Do I believe my experience, or do I believe my tradition? Which one do I believe? He was asking many of the same questions that I was asking myself when I came face to face with this world we live in, this universe we live in. And so it's really interesting that when God shows up, God doesn't say anything about justice, or it doesn't make a nice diagram or explanation. See, Job, this is why it happened. What God does instead is takes Job on a tour of the cosmos. It's actually in there. God says, hey, Job, from the whirlwind. God appears and says, hey, Job, this is his answer, okay, to a man suffering grievous loss, grievous harm. He says, Job, have you thought about the sky? Job, have you thought about the ocean? Have you thought about the earth? Have you thought about the world you live in? Have you ever even seen it? Or have you been so concerned about your little human affairs that you've never actually seen the cosmos? Job, I'm sure, is like, what? Why are you showing me Orion? Why are you showing me the Great Bear? Why are you showing me the Pleiades, the stars? Why are you showing me the earth and the sea? This is kind of a large-scale cosmic tour. It's like sky, earth, sea. It's really fast. Job says, sure, whatever, God, you made this stuff. You were there when all this was formed. I wasn't. I get it. I'm small, essentially. I am small. I am of little account. To that, God says, hey, Job, have you thought about the mountain goats? Literally, he shows Job the mountain goats. This is God's response to a good man's suffering. Have you considered the mountain goats? They don't live anywhere near your city. In fact, from where they live, it is your city that is peripheral. It is your civilization which is peripheral. They've got their own community. in a place far from where you live. They have concerns that are other than you. And you know what, Job? I love the mountain goat. I tend to it. That's my business. The mountain goat is something you might want to think about while you're suffering. Mountain goat. And God goes on. God's got a whole zoo to show Job. The donkey, the wild ass. The wild ass mocks your civilization, God says. Okay? It has no interest in it, laughs at it. The ostrich, now here's a good bird. The ostrich. God points out the ostrich, and as we go on with these animals, every animal gets more and more and more lines of scripture. It's like 6 full verses for the ostrich. God says, hey, Job, Mr. Suffering, have you thought about this bird who lives miles away from where you live? I think about it all the time. I feed it, and just look at it. Isn't it beautiful? But it's also, the ostrich is a little bit weird. The ostrich just kind of just lays its egg right on the desert floor and leaves it. Not a very good mother, the ostrich. And half the time when the baby ostrich is born, the mother kind of just is kind of mean to it, kind of doesn't really take care of it well. Sometimes the wolves eat it. And, you know, it's just kind of a foolish bird. Not only that, but the ostrich can't even fly, God says. The ostrich has feathers and wings, but can't fly. The ostrich is the most foolish of birds, yet God is proud of it and God loves it. And Job sees it as if for the first time. The ostrich. The vulture. Now, here's a bird that I can admire. Went out to, I'm a birder myself, I went out to York River State Park this morning, opened the car door, looked up, and it was vulture time. Must have been at least 10 turkey vultures up there. And then there was one bald eagle up there with them. Vultures, they can process things in their stomachs that kill every other animal on the planet. There are vultures that live in Asia that eat bones entire, nothing but bones. They live completely on dry bones. Weird, but true. The vulture is part of God's creation, and God says to Job, look at the vulture. Look at this creature, living on blood, feeding blood to its young, eating dead things. Even this weird, dark, kind of violent and creepy animal belongs. This animal that lives on death belongs in this world, and God loves it. And I think that Job is seeing all of these animals, like I said, as if seeing them for the first time. I think Job is seeing these animals as God sees them. And the reason I think this, I'll actually hold off for a minute why I think this is true. But I'm going to say 2 more things before I say why I think it is that Job is seeing these things, these creatures, as God does. God finishes off the tour with 2 very scary animals. One of them is Behemoth, an animal that not even God can approach without a sword, a land animal. And then Leviathan, great sea serpent, the very personification of chaos and sort of destructive, decreative forces in the universe. Job has very up close and personal experiences with these 2 creatures. And so what God does is take Job on this tour of the cosmos. And this doesn't look very cosmic to us, does it? But I mean, you can go literally, the Atlanta petting zoo has like 8 out of the 10 animals. I didn't hit all the animals here, just to give you a break. But literally the petting zoo in Atlanta has 8 of these 10 animals in it. But in Job's time, these animals existed at the very periphery of the known world. If Job were written today, I believe that the cosmic tour would look a little bit like the first half of my program tonight. If Job were written today, it wouldn't be about vultures and goats. It would be about evolution. It would be about stars being born. hydrogen fusion. It would be about even mass extinctions. It would all be in there. It's all part of the world we live in. I think if Job were written today, that the hero would see everything I showed you before and more. The miracle, there's two things I want to say about this. One is that it's a miracle. The reason why I think that Job saw creation as God sees it is because this little tactic of God's showing Job creation worked. After it was over, Job said this. He said, I had heard of you by the ear, God, but now my eye has seen you. Head knowledge versus experiential knowledge. I had heard of you by the ear, O God, but now my eye has seen you. But Job didn't really see God. What Job saw was the stars. What Job saw was the earth and the ocean and these animals. Job saw the cosmos. So I conclude from that to see the cosmos clearly is to see God clearly. I had heard of you by the ear, but now my eye has seen you. In encountering creation, in encountering a brutal and brilliant cosmos, Job has seen God. Second thing I want to leave with you, well, actually there's two more things. One is that God comes across, if you sit down and read Job, God comes across kind of as a bully, frankly. Here's this man broken by grief, and God's like, where were you when I created the stars, little man? Where were you? This real kind of almost bullying thing. But if you read it closely, you'll see that God is delighted by creation. And I want you to remember this. Aren't I significant, God? That was one of my questions. Aren't I significant? Yes. That's why God showed up for you when you called on God. God did show up. God did show up for Job. What is God like anyway? Well, that's kind of hard to say. Turns out there's a long tradition within Christianity that basically admits up front that God is hard to figure out. God is experienced more often than understood. Job experienced God when Job experienced creation. And finally, who are we to believe? It's not a matter of one or the other. It's a matter of both. Both belong. You can read Scripture and you can read Scientific American on the same evening. And the two can communicate with each other. And the last thing I want to say is that so often churches, religious people, Christians avoid science. One reason it's difficult. It can be a hard thing to learn. Parts of it, it's a lot to learn. But most Christians seem to think of science as something that needs to be reconciled or squared up with Christianity, like it's a problem to solve. Like it's mainly a matter of just getting all the parts right. You can figure out some system where Christianity and science kind of fit together. But what I want to leave you with is sort of the main thing that I tell every group that I see, which is science should not be considered a problem for Christianity. As in we got to come up with some mental model to make these two things fit together. Science for me and science for others can be an entryway into faith. It is a doorway into a new kind of larger faith. It's still a Christian faith. It's always and forever a Christian faith. Okay. Science is not a problem for people of faith. Science is a doorway to faith. Understood properly, science is a doorway to faith. I went a little long. I'm sorry, I got a little excited. It's 5 minutes after the hour. Y'all been very patient. If I had gold stars, I'd pass them out for everybody because you sat there very patiently and I've gone over time.
I'm happy to sit around though, answer questions. We have until, I think it was posted until 6. So I am here to answer any questions that you might have. Anybody out there in the gallery?
Yeah, and I have a handheld mic that we can pass around so that Paul and everyone else can hear your questions. And if you're listening via Zoom, we'd love for you to type questions in the chat box and we'll try to answer some of those as well. We'd just ask you out of respect for time to try to keep your questions short and to the point. Anybody got a question? I've got tons. All right, Scott.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
When you first slide, you had a chart of the graph of the extinction events over time. And that looked kind of regular. It was regular extinction events every so often. It seems like kind of difficult. So I guess people look at simply regularity of extinction. Is there any explanation?
No, we think they come from different causes, and it does look a little bit like there's a little bit of regularity. I'm not sure if people have certainly plugged into a computer to see if there's any sort of regularity. But the truth is that we are in the middle of one right now, caused largely by human beings, of course. But it, in 100 million years, it will show up on that. And we're in the middle of one right now. But yes, we are due for one. It's keeping the period, the pattern going.
Thanks, Scott.
Anybody else?
I'll ask my question. Well, I'm a biblical scholar, and so certainly I'm keenly interested in the creation stories in Genesis. And so I'm wondering, given what you presented here and what we read in the first couple of chapters of Genesis, what value do you find in those first 2 chapters in the creation stories as a person of science and faith?
I see 2 things in Genesis, and there's 2 stories, of course. But in the first story, Genesis 1, it's really interesting. It is almost certainly, if not the most carefully constructed, one of the most carefully constructed passages in all of Scripture. The order in it, the sort of, and if we all read Hebrew, we would see this a little bit better. But there's a whole lot of structure, a whole lot of great care that went into the writing of those stories, of that story. And so I see the great elaborate care and deep attention to detail in that first story mirrors to me the great elaborate attention to detail in the cosmos. This, the building up, the slow building up of one thing after the other. So I see that. I see the very the great attentiveness to the construction of that text in the same way I see the great attentiveness to the construction of the world. So that's one way. Another thing that I see in the second story, there's a lot of weird stuff in that second story, people. I don't know if you have sat down and really read that thing, but it's not a nice linear progression from one thing to the next. In the first story, over and over again, like a nice, sweet rhythm, it is good. It is good. It is good. It all happens in a very orderly way, very sort of liturgical kind of way. And it is very structured. The second story, you're like just a few lines into it, and what's God saying? It is not good that man should be alone. Oh, this is a not good thing. They got to fix this. And if you actually read it, I don't have the points in my head, there's like 3 or 4 places where God's like, oh, that didn't work out so well. Let's try this other thing. And it's kind of comical. And also the second story, whereas the first story is sort of like from a view from nowhere. It's kind of this sort of this grand cosmic kind of almost detached kind of feeling to it. The second story is very earthy, very muddy, very get your hands down in the mud. It's kind of a bottom-up story. Whereas the first story is kind of a top-down story. But that bottom-up story reminds me of course, of evolution, although I don't think the authors of Genesis were like, hey, let's put some, they had this vision of evolution, and let's put some evolution in there. I don't think that is the case. I think that the authors of the story saw that Earth had a way of creating itself, being a partner in the creation process. The earth itself had some agency. And that's why in the first story, if you ever notice, God says, let the waters bring forth a swarm of swimming creatures. God doesn't say just let there be swimming creatures. God says, let the waters bring forth. God says, let the land, bring forth. So there's this idea in both stories that God has granted some agency and some power to the earth itself to perpetuate itself. That's all of that stuff that I see. But ultimately, for me, Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is about free relationships. That's what it's about. And this is the real value of it. Art asked me about the value of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. What I've shared with you so far are things that I kind of see in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. There are three relationships as far as I can see. And I imagine it's a triangle. God's at the top, creation's down here, and humanity's down here. And there are three relationships: God and creation, God and humanity, humanity and creation. And each one of those three relationships gets broken, gets challenged, gets maybe not broken, but gets I'll just say broken. I can't even know the word off the top of my head, but essentially broken. It's a story of how we got to where we are with a focus on these three relationships. And you can see, if you read through it, that all three relationships are addressed. God, creation, creation, humanity, humanity, God. They're all addressed. They were all in sync, and then something happened. A catastrophe of some sort happened. Whatever it really was, I don't know. I don't think it was an apple or a tree. Or a fruit. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Don't be shy if I get a question. Do you have any questions on the chat box? Okay. Yeah.
It's not exactly a question. Just for
You gotta hold it up to your mouth.
my first impression of Job was not as good as maybe yours. It was one of these unfair things. I was a very young man when I was making a judgment. And the fact that he got all of his stuff back and another set of wives and children didn't seem to cut it with me.
No.
Because he lost some very good people. But regardless of those details, what you're telling me is you can learn a lot more about God from Job, from the book of Job, than I am. I gotta read that.
Yeah, that first story, I mean, the first story is, to me, the most troubling. When God brings up, basically has a bet with the accuser at Job's expense. That to me that's just beyond the pale. It's like, I don't even know what that's about.
Okay.
But beyond that, I think there's a lot to learn.
30 chapters to read.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Let me ask a question.
sure.
As a scientist, if you could ask God a question, what would it be?
If you can hear Mark, if you could ask God a question as a scientist, what would that question be?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. My first answer that came to my head immediately, because I don't have time to sit here and go through all the things I could come up with, send me home, is why evolution? Why? Because the amount of suffering, just simple, plain animal suffering, nothing animal suffering. I cannot escape the idea that animal suffering has a moral component to it. It's not just, I don't believe, I'm not morally indifferent to that. And all that, just hundreds of millions of years of animal suffering, that would be the first thing I ask. And then I ask a lot more, but that'd be the first thing.
Good question. Glenn Underwood.
Well, I wanted to mention that you wrote 2 books. One of them was about the subject we talked about.
Right. Yeah, the first book that I wrote is called Stars Beneath Us. And my presentation tonight is essentially that book talk. Having done it about 3 years, so I decided I would do it this time because it's been a long time since I've done it. But yeah, it's called Stars Beneath Us, and it basically addresses questions of science and religion through the book of Job. It uses the book of Job throughout the whole. Starts with the kind of thing I went through with you, more detail, but then addresses a lot of issues with science and religion through the lens of Job.
I was hoping that we might be able to use that in our spiritual formation class sometime in the future.
Hope so.
Question. So, I've at times described my faith as very sort of earthy myself.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you kind of, I'm imagining that your faith is way more earthy than mine, even because
Is way what?
more
More
earthy than
earthy.
mine, because I mean, you know a lot of more things than I know. So I'm wondering how that like affects your daily like spiritual life, like that you know all of these things. Like, are you not constantly?
My spiritual life is completely inseparable from all of that. Whether it's astronomy, whether it's biology, whether it's birds. If you removed all that stuff, I wouldn't have anything left. I mean, it really is foundational. I mean, I don't know how I could have an active spiritual life.
I saw Ed Sadowski back in the one, and I'll mention, in the podcast we recorded, we talked about looking at a quasar and how profound of a moment that was.
Yeah, it felt personal. Yeah, I was talking to Art in our podcast about. So this is another quick answer to your question about when I discovered a sort of really rare kind of object in space. It's a certain class of quasar, and it was about 7 billion light years away. And when I discovered that, it's not earthy. That's like the opposite direction. But it felt personal. I felt like I made a personal connection with that thing out there. So far, it is unbelievably far away. But yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you.
You talked about in Genesis, the triangle, God, creation, and humanity. Where does Jesus fit into that? Is he part of creation or part of humanity?
I think Jesus fits in the middle of all three. I really do. One quick answer to that is that Jesus essentially comes as a kind of solution to those broken relationships. And he touches all 3 points. He's a human being. He's physical. Okay, he's part of the cosmos. He's not separate from it. So he's part of creation. And he, like you and me, is associated with all of creation. We're not alien from the trees. We're not alien from the insects. We're not alien from the birds. And neither was Jesus alien from those things. He was connected to them. Obviously, Jesus has a divine nature, connects with God. He's human. He's part of creation. So I see Jesus as kind of right in the middle of all 3 of those, sort of as a way of reconciling all 3.
Thank you.
Going down here, Art.
I have a question. I want to know how far you're willing to go with what you said. For example, all those galaxies that you showed us, do they all have the same God who made everything? If so, does that mean that each one of them has had a Christ who died on earth? No, I'm serious.
No, I know. I just.
I want to know, do you think if everything is made by God, is heaven made of dark matter? How far are you willing to go? I agree with you totally on evolution, but I want to know how this fits into
Yeah, yeah.
universe?
I think the answer is that I think there's one cosmos. And I think that there's not multiple gods for multiple galaxies or multiple planetary systems. I think that if ET needs a savior, ET will be given one. I think that creatures receive what they need. And we needed dolphins don't need Jesus. They didn't receive Jesus. We did. We needed that. So my answer to you would be one God. And if I read Job correctly, God will take care of all God's creatures. And if that means sending Savior, sending whatever kind of Savior that would look like, then yeah.
Great question. And if I can just piggyback just briefly, it really does beg the question of who is God, or what sort of God do you believe in? You sort of alluded to that, or pointed to that in your talk. If we understand God as a person bigger than us, like a big person, then it's hard to sort of make that intellectual leap to this one local God being the God of the cosmos. But if we understand God on a much larger cosmic scale, it may be possible to make that theological jump.
Yeah.
Great question. Who else has got it?
Anybody else?
Those are good. Don't let him get out of here easy.
I'll be here tomorrow morning too. Come up with a question at 3 a.m. You can find me tomorrow morning. Sit up straight in bed. Oh my goodness.
So I asked this from the pulpit last week. Where would you say heaven is? I remember my wife, when she was in middle school, I think she went to a friend's house and they showed her this video. And they said they had discovered heaven somewhere out in space. And I don't think she bought into that. But
And where did this come from?
I'm sure it was a VHS tape.
Okay.
From maybe some sect within Christianity.
1982 or something.
Probably.
Yeah.
So I don't. If someone asked you,
I don't have a location. The answer is I have no idea. I do understand the traditional Christian belief is that we will have bodies. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, especially given what science says is going to happen to at least our solar system and the universe. It's not a pretty picture. If you run the movie on out, eschatology of scientific eschatology is not real promising. So I don't really know the answer. But I don't think it's a location like in Galaxy 3EGJ 2006. I don't think that. Yes.
Is there a God before the Big Bang or after the final count?
I don't know.
It's philosophical.
I don't know. I don't think of God as
I imagine
that way.
as a scientist.
Yeah. I'm winging it, people. I don't have an answer to the question. I'll just say that some people think of God as being outside of time, the outside of time. Remember, C.S. Lewis described it as, imagine there's a parade, and you're walking down an alley and you're just seeing one person, one flag waver, one tuba player, one float at a time. But God will be like above the top of the building looking down at the whole thing at once. I think of that more than I think of anything else. But I'm not sure that I would say I really believe that. That's just the image that comes to mind when I think of God and time.
You were talking about it playing out, everything playing out. And I think about traditional Christianity and Christian belief and the afterlife that you said you don't know.
Mhm.
And my ultimate question is, does it matter? And why?
You know, my dad died about 5.5 years ago, and I never, before that, I might have asked the same question. This is just a totally personal answer. This is not me as a PhD, whatever. This is just me as a dude. Before that, I never thought of it. The idea of an afterlife, to be frank, seemed a little ludicrous to me. But ever since that has happened, and maybe I've gotten World War II, I think about it sometimes. And I don't know. You know what I think of it? I think of it as like what a seminary professor called a blessed hope. I hope for it. I would love to sit down with my dad and a drink by the ocean. But it's just a hope. That's all it is. But hope's a pretty powerful thing. So.
Have you ever been confronted with the question, how did God get to be God?
Nope. But I have now.
We're looking at a gentleman who just celebrated his 75th wedding anniversary recently.
Well, congratulations, sir.
That occurred for me when my son was 4 years old. A rainy Saturday when his mother and his sister had gone shopping, and I was responsible for his well-being, and it was raining. And he was the kind of boy that liked to get outside, but I wouldn't let him go. And he began to fuss in such a way about the rain that I thought it would be appropriate to try to explain to him that God was in control of the rain, and we would have to accept it, that God knew best about the rain. So that's when he asked, how did God get to be God?
And what do you think about that question? It stuck with you, didn't it? It must have.
Kids don't let us off the hook.
No,
when it comes to
no.
technology. Yeah.
No, they do not.
Yeah.
Neither do college students, it turns out. Not just kids.
Will you all join me in expressing our gratitude?